Hi everybody, and welcome to the third video on the Labor Day GM IM Norm Invitational. Today I'm going to be going over rounds 5 and 6 of our tournament. And so in the GM group, we have a tie for first between three different players. Gorovitz, Corley, and Kevin Wang all have 4 out of 6. Kevin Wang and Casa Corley both can make a GM Norm if they get 2.5 out of 3 in their next 3 rounds. Tied for 4th through 8th are 5 different players with 3 out of 6. Balus, Jairam, Katz, Mandiza, and Steve Wang. Steve Wang is the only one of these players who can still make a norm. If he gets an even score 1.5 out of 3 through his next 3 rounds, he'll get an IM norm, 4.5 out of 9. That would be his third and final IM norm. With 2.5 out of 6, we have Benalla, and then Jacobson has half out of 6. In the IM group, we have 2 people tied for first with 4 out of 6 both, Gary Shankar and Hans Niemann. Both can make an IM norm with 2.5 out of 3 in their next 3 games. Annie Wang and Aaron Jacobson both have 3.5 out of 6. Both players can make an IM norm with a perfect score, 3 out of 3. But Annie Wang can also make a WGM norm with 2.5 out of 3. Jennifer Yu has 3 out of 6. Del Campo, 3 out of 7. Arjun and Adamson both at even scores as well. Dolger, 2.5 out of 7. And then Wesley Wang, 1.5 out of 6. Okay, so for today's featured game, I thought I'd take a look at this pretty tactical and quick game between Fry Mandiza and Brandon Jacobson. Knight f3 was the first move. Knight f6. c4 English opening. b6. So black is going to meet this fianchettoed bishop with a bishop on b7. Bishop g2. g6, signaling a double fianchetto by black. Castles, bishop g7. d4. Castles. Rook e1. Gonna play e4 in the future. And now black claims a little bit of piece of the center with the move c5. And white chooses to keep it locked up. d5. Now black plays b5, trying to break up these 2 central pawns. It would be a big mistake for white to take on b5 because this pawn would be hanging, and it's more important to keep your central pawns than your side pawns. So e4 was played, thus the move rook e1 earlier. Hanging the pawn on c4, but only for a brief period of time. Knight c3, d6, now knight d2. Aiming at this pawn, that's a bad arrow. Aiming at that pawn on c4. There's no real way black can guard it. I guess bishop a6, but then just bishop f1. Gonna win the pawn anyways. So Jacobson played knight bd7. Knight takes c4, bishop a6, bishop f1. Now knight e8. So this was an interesting move by Jacobson, trying to keep some pieces on the board, trying to keep the tension in the position. Knight b6 was another option. After knight takes b6, maybe queen takes, probably pawn takes. I'm not sure. But trading some pieces off over on the wing. Knight e8 was played, keeping some tension, keeping some pieces on. Now Mandiza played bishop g5, setting up some potential tactics on this e7 pawn, which we'll see later. If this knight weren't on e8 as well, knight takes d6 would be immediately possible because the pawn cannot capture due to the pin on the queen. Rook b8, eyeing this b2 pawn. Queen d2, defending the pawn, also setting up a battery with the bishop on g5. Now rook b4, attacking the knight on c4 in sort of an unorthodox way, using the rook along the rank early on in the game. b3. So this was probably a move Jacobson wanted to see played. Now this bishop is doing a little bit more, pinning the knight to the rook. Bishop d4. Alright, and here's where the fireworks start in this game. Mandiza played the move e5. So this pawn cannot be captured right away, at least, because of knight takes e5, then knight takes e5. And this move is not possible because the bishop on a6 is hanging. And if you take on f1 first, then you're going to run into a massive fork. The knight's going to attack the queen, the rook, the pawn, all at the same time. And on the next move, the bishop will be captured on f1 or some sort of check or something. So this was not possible. So after e5, the pawn really can't be captured. Bishop takes c4 was played instead. And now another crazy move by Mendiza. E takes d6. So instead of recapturing the bishop, he chose to go for some tactics on this e7 pawn. Bishop takes e7 or pawn takes e7 is pretty much unstoppable. So strangely enough, knight takes d6, bishop takes e7, queen b6, bishop takes f8, knight takes f8, b takes c4 is the computer like recommended line, this series of trades. I flipped to the end again. I need to stop doing that. But this series of trades where white actually ends up a clear exchange, but supposedly it's in favor of black due to, I guess, better piece placement. That's definitely a crazy line. I'm not sure how it'd be possible to see all this. But that was the best move in the position to get to this final position where you're actually down in exchange, but slightly better. So instead, after e takes d6, Jacobson played knight e5. Another crazy move by Mendiza. Rook takes e5. All sorts of pieces are hanging in this position. Jacobson played queen takes d6, which was actually, I think, the best move. Rook e1, saving the rook now. It's funny, rook e3 was supposedly the best move by like plus 0.3. I just think this is funny. Bishop takes rook, queen takes, and now you're threatening. Bishop takes e7. So rook e1 was played. Bishop takes f1. Bishop takes e7, finally. Queen d7 takes, bishop h3, saving the bishop. Bishop h6, saving his bishop. And so after all these trades, white is up in exchange and a pawn. However, black's bishops are definitely a little bit scary. Two bishops aiming right at the king, and this knight, you'll see, hops into the game pretty quickly here. Knight f6, rook a c1, knight g4, and now knight e4. Both a defensive move and an aggressive move, attacking the c5 pawn. So Jacobson played f5, which was actually the decisive moment in the game. Because after knight takes c5, something like a bishop takes f2 would be a blunder after the move queen takes f2. Remember, your queen is hanging as well, I think. Yeah, like if queen takes d5 or something ridiculous like this, there's always rook e8 check. Yep. So after f5, knight takes c5. Jacobson tried the move queen b5. But after knight d3, his rook was trapped, and he decided to call it quits. He resigned in this position. So after f5, there's like a couple of doesn't seem like it should be a losing move on the spot. But after knight takes c5, if black tries, let's say, like queen d6, something similar will happen after. Oh wait, no, queen d6 just hangs the rook. Takes c5. If he tries like bishop takes c5, for example, then after rook takes c5, rook b7, let's say, queen c3, and white's attack on the king is just too strong. Queen's aiming at g7, rook's ready to come down to c8 and over to f8. There's no way to really stop these threats. So like if black just plays nothing, for example, rook c8 check, rook f8 checkmate. So that is why he tried to play the move queen b5, but then resigned shortly after knight d3. Okay, I thought that was a crazy game. Definitely an interesting one to look at. Stay tuned for the next 3 rounds, as we'll find out if anybody will make a norm. Again, I think there are 7 players in contention for some sort of norm. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching, guys.